The most dangerous man in the city was being wheeled out of a five-star hotel, wrapped in stolen bedsheets, and the only person who noticed was the woman nobody had ever bothered to look at twice. She worked the graveyard desk at the Alderbrook Grand, soft-bodied and unhurried, and endlessly, deliberately overlooked, which was exactly why she was standing in a service corridor at 2 in the morning when two men in suits that cost more than her yearly rent pushed a laundry cart past her with a stranger's hand hanging limp over the side. She could have looked away. Women like her had built entire lives out of looking away. Instead, Josie Danner made the one choice that would unmake a traitor, save a boy's failing heart, and drag a monster in a cashmere coat, however unwillingly, into the light. We post a brand new story like this every single day, so subscribe now. Rain had been falling on the river since sundown, and by midnight the storm had settled into a steady downpour that made the old service elevators groan like something asked to work past its limits. Upstairs, a private foundation gala had wound down hours ago, all string quartet and champagne and men who wrote checks with one hand and kept the other clean by never touching what it paid for. Josie hadn't worked the ballroom. She worked the mezzanine desk, the graveyard shift clerk who balanced the day's room charges, verified vendor invoices, and kept the master key log that made the building's whole memory hers to hold. It was quiet work, and it made her invisible in a specific way. Not ignored, just filed under furniture, the soft, round woman who had your incidentals sorted before you thought to ask. She was 29, a size she'd stopped apologizing for around 25, and she wore her uniform blazer the way she wore everything else, like she'd earned the right to take up the space it covered. There was a coffee stain on her cuff, from a guest who'd knocked his own cup over and let her take the blame with a smile so practiced it barely registered as cruelty. That was the ordinary texture of Josie's nights. Men who looked through her until something needed fixing, then looked at her just long enough to be disappointed she hadn't fixed it faster. She had learned, the way people learn to breathe underwater, how to keep her face still and her voice pleasant, because rent didn't care about her feelings, and neither did the number on her nephew's hospital bill. Milo didn't know any of that. Josie made sure of it. To her 8-year-old nephew, she was the aunt who came home smelling of carpet and printer toner, who warmed soup on the stove above Ruiz Hardware, who lined his toy trains along the windowsill on nights his chest hurt too much for the floor. He was gentle in a way that made the loud world feel built at the wrong scale for him, with a heart that had never worked the way a heart should. Milo understood that some nights his chest felt like a room without enough air, and that someday, once he was stronger, he wanted to ride a real train into the mountains where the clouds sat low enough to touch the trees. That dream was why Josie picked up every extra graveyard shift the hotel would give her, why she swallowed every small daily insult and counted her tips twice before hiding them in an envelope under her mattress. So when the gala guests finally drifted out and the night manager clocked out early, spooked by the storm, Josie stayed at her station running the audit the hotel actually paid her for. The Alderbrook felt different after midnight, hollow and listening, its warm luxury peeled back to the bones. She'd stepped down to the service level to log a supply discrepancy when she heard it. A hard scrape near the freight elevator, then a low, muffled groan that stopped her with one hand on the doorframe. The corridor ahead was narrow and yellow-lit, carts lined against one wall, most of the overnight staff already gone. Then came a man's voice, low and clipped. "Keep his head down. If anyone sees his face, this gets messy." Josie's breath caught. Every sensible instinct told her to turn around. Clerks who valued their kneecaps did not step toward voices like that. But then the cart rolled into view, and she saw the hand hanging over its edge. Large, pale, a heavy black signet ring, a soaked cuff. His body lay half-buried under a mountain of linen, head lolling to one side. Dark hair, a hard, unshaven jaw, a face the color of ash. One of the suited men caught his chin and shoved it back down with the casual cruelty of men who had done this before. The other held a spent syringe loosely between two fingers. Josie pressed back against a shelf of towels, certain her own heartbeat would give her away. Storm knocked out the lower gate, one of them muttered. "We wait till Voss's driver swings around." Voss. The name landed cold in her chest, though she couldn't have said why. Not spoken like a name at all, but like a warning someone had learned the hard way not to ignore. The man in the cart shifted. Barely anything. A twitch, a shallow breath. but it was enough. He was alive! Josie thought of Milo asleep under his train blanket, trusting the world stayed good because she kept pretending it did. The two men stepped off to argue near the corner, and her fingers went white around the linen in her arms. No, she told herself, do not be stupid. But the man in the cart made a small, broken sound, and that was what undid her. Josie moved before courage had time to leave her, wheeling her own cart forward to block their sightline, hands shaking as she pulled back the sheets. He was heavier than she expected, all dead weight under a suit worth more than her car. She used every ounce of strength she owned to shift him from one cart to the other, pain shooting up her spine, breath coming in short, panicked pulls. The storm helped. Thunder cracked loud enough to cover the scrape of wheels. She buried him under clean towels and a stained tablecloth, then pushed. She knew the Alderbrook's back arteries better than any manager who'd ever signed her paycheck, which doors stuck open, which cameras had blind spots, which service elevator groaned but still ran if you held the button down. Years of being furniture in these halls had taught her every seam in the building's skin, and now that invisibility became the only weapon she had. At the loading dock, the rain hit her like thrown gravel. She wrestled him into the delivery van Mr. Ruiz let her borrow on hospital mornings, keys still in her pocket from last week, an ordinary mistake that suddenly felt like fate reaching down to help. Up close, he smelled like rain and expensive smoke and something bitter under his skin, his face carved for shadow instead of sunlight, the kind of face that made people obey without being asked. Josie hated that she noticed. She hated more that she was afraid of him, and afraid for him in the very same breath. By the time she pulled out of the alley, her hands were locked so tight on the wheel, they ached, waiting for headlights in her mirror, a shout, a gunshot. But the city just swallowed her whole, rain smearing the windshield, sirens wailing somewhere far off. Her apartment sat above Rui's Hardware, up a narrow staircase that always smelled like machine oil. She parked in the alley and sat there shaking too hard to open the door. She had no plan. She'd saved a man from disappearing and carried danger straight home to the one person she couldn't afford to lose. But leaving a stranger to die in a borrowed van wasn't an option, not with his skin burning under her palm. Josie half-dragged, half-carried him up the stairs, stopping to listen for movement below, until she got him onto her narrow couch, soaked, chest heaving. She peeled off his ruined jacket and found a dark bruise already blooming at his throat, where the needle had gone in. Milo appeared in the hallway in his soft blue pajamas, clutching his favorite toy train. "Tia," he whispered. "Who is that?" Josie knelt in front of him, her wet uniform dragging at her knees. "He's someone who got hurt," she said softly. "I'm going to help him tonight, and then we'll figure out what to do." "Is he bad?" Milo asked. Josie looked back at the man on her couch, at the gun she only now noticed tucked into his waistband, and her stomach dropped. She lifted it away with 2 fingers and set it high on the cabinet, out of reach, before forcing her voice steady. "I don't know yet, baby." Milo considered this the grave way he considered everything, then set his little toy train on the coffee table beside the stranger. "So he won't be scared when he wakes up sick," he said. Something in Josie cracked quietly open. She pulled her nephew into her arms while the storm tapped the windows, and, somewhere below, a washing machine thumped through its cycle like a tired heart refusing to stop. Near dawn, the fever broke. Josie sat on the floor beside the couch with a kitchen knife in one hand, ready to call for help the moment his breathing changed. Then the stranger's eyes opened, dark, not confused, not weak, not grateful. The eyes of a man deciding whether the world had earned the right to keep him in it. His hand shot out and closed around her wrist. Josie gasped, and the knife hit the floor. "Where am I?" he asked, his voice rough, terrifyingly calm. "My apartment," she managed. "Above the hardware store on Wren Street. You were drugged. 2 men were carrying you out of the hotel in a laundry cart." "I got you out." His eyes sharpened. "The Alderbrook." She nodded, and something cold moved across his face. "Who are you?" Josie almost laughed at the absurdity of it after the night she'd survived. "Josie Danner," she said. "I run the graveyard desk at the hotel. Please let go of my wrist." He didn't, not right away. His gaze traveled her face, her damp curls, the soft, generous shape of her body inside a uniform 2 sizes too small for comfort. She braced for the flicker of judgment people thought she didn't catch. It never came. "You saved my life," he said finally. "I saved a stranger," she answered. "I didn't know who you were." The faintest shadow of a smile touched his mouth. No warmth in it. "No," he agreed. "You didn't." He sat up slowly, and even pale, even wounded, the small room seemed to shrink around him. Josie felt the danger folded into his stillness. "My gun," he said. "On top of the cabinet, away from the child," Josie answered. His head turned. "Child." Milo reappeared in the doorway. "You woke up," he said. Something shifted fast across the stranger's face, the cold cracking slightly. "That's my mountain train," Milo said, patting closer. "You can hold it if you want. I use it on bad hospital days." The man took the little train with a care that looked almost painful to watch, as though it weighed more than any weapon he'd ever carried. "Thank you," he said quietly. Milo coughed into his sleeve, and Josie was at his side instantly, checking his color, smoothing his hair back. The stranger watched every motion. The pill organizer on the counter, the medical bills under a chipped mug, the way her hands only started trembling once Milo had stopped coughing. "What's wrong with him?" he asked. "That's not your business," Josie said. "No," he agreed. "But someone tried to kill me last night, and you brought me into your home anyway, which makes everything in this apartment my concern until I know who's coming through that door." Josie stared at him, anger warming through her fear. "You don't get to wake up on my couch and take over my life." His gaze held hers, steady. Most people looked away from that stare. Josie didn't. Then, very softly, he said, "I'm Enzo Castellano." The name dropped into the apartment like glass shattering in the dark. Josie had heard it before. Everyone in the city had, though rarely above a murmur. Enzo Castellano, whose restaurants never lost money, whose nightclubs let politicians in through unmarked doors, whose enemies had a habit of moving away, disappearing, or discovering religion all at once. Josie stood so fast, the chair scraped behind her. "No," she whispered. He looked at her without apology. "No, no, no." She backed away, one hand over her mouth. "I thought you were just hurt. I brought you here. I brought you near Milo." He didn't soften it. "You did." Milo glanced between them, confused. "Is he famous?" Josie couldn't answer. Her mind was already racing ahead through every ending. The men in suits, the name Voss, her whole fragile life hanging by a thread she hadn't known she was holding. Enzo rose slower than he wanted, eyes sweeping the window, the door, the fire escape, counting exits, becoming, in real time, the man his reputation promised. "You said men took me," he said. "Tell me exactly what you heard." "I don't want any part of this," Josie said. "You already have a part in it," he answered. And the words weren't cruel, which made them worse. She looked at Milo watching them with worried eyes, and dropped her voice. One of them said a name. "Voss. That's all I know." For the first time, Enzo looked genuinely dangerous. Not loud, not shocked, simply still. So still the air seemed to draw back from him. "Roman," he said, and the name came out like a locked door swinging open onto something buried and terrible. Downstairs, the hardware store's bell jingled as ordinary life carried on, unaware that a wounded Mafia boss was standing above it, holding an 8-year-old's toy train like it was the only solid thing left in the world. "You didn't just save me from being killed," Enzo said. "You saved me from the one man close enough to bury me without anyone ever asking a question." Josie's mouth went dry. "What does that mean?" "It means Roman Voss will come looking for me," he said. "And when he learns who helped me, he will come looking for you too." Roman Voss did not come that morning. That was the mercy. The terror was knowing that he would. Enzo stood at the window with Milo's toy train still resting in his palm, tracking the street below. Josie wanted to scream at him to leave, but Milo sat watching them both, so she swallowed the scream and made toast instead. Toast was something she understood. If she stopped moving for even a second, she was afraid she might come apart entirely. Enzo watched her from across the kitchen, silent for a long time, which somehow made him feel more dangerous, not less. He had asked her to walk through it again, every detail. The men, the syringe, the cart, the name Voss, a foundation mentioned low in the hallway, before the men fell silent. Each detail seemed to make him colder, sharper. When she finally asked who Roman was to him, Enzo looked down at the toy train, thumb against the painted roof, and told her Roman had stood at his side for 15 years. Advisor, friend, family, in every way except blood. Then he told her about his sister. Her name had been Sophia, and he said it with a care that softened the room. Years ago, someone sold her location to Enzo's enemies. She was taken from a safe house only a handful of trusted people knew existed. He found her too late. Ever since, he had turned grief into rules, rules into walls, walls into an empire too cold for anyone to reach the man buried underneath. Roman had helped him build every one of those walls. Now Enzo understood Roman might have helped create the wound that made them necessary. Josie didn't want to feel sorry for him, but grief didn't care what kind of life a person lived. She had watched Milo sweat through fevers, watched doctors soften their voices before bad news, watched bills stack like snow against a locked door. Pain recognized pain, even when it refused to forgive it. By noon, Enzo had borrowed a burner phone from Mr. Ruiz downstairs, who handed it over without a single question. Enzo made 3 calls, no names, only instructions that sounded harmless to anyone who didn't know what danger sounded like. Move the West Ledger. Find Jax Calloway. Josie pretended not to listen, though every word landed in her chest like a stone dropped down a well. That afternoon, her phone rang. It was the hotel. Josie knew before she answered. The front office manager's voice was crisp and falsely sorry. Questions about a missing linen cart, about access logs that didn't reconcile. Effective immediately, her employment was terminated. No job meant no rent. No rent meant no apartment. No apartment meant no safe place for Milo between hospital visits. She thanked the woman out of habit, hung up, and stared at the wall. Enzo was watching her. Who was that? No one, Josie said. He stepped closer. Josie. He said her name like he already knew the lie and was giving her one clean chance to set it down. I got fired, she admitted. His jaw tightened. Because of me. Because I made a choice, she snapped. Don't take that from me too. Something in his face looked almost wounded. Then he nodded once. Fair. But Roman didn't stop at the job. That evening, walking to the pharmacy for Milo's prescription, a black sedan glided to the curb beside her. The window lowered, and Roman Voss smiled out at her like they had a standing appointment. Polished, handsome in a tired, silvered way, soft leather gloves, eyes that read as kind right up until she noticed there was nothing behind them. Miss Danner, he said, you've caused a great deal of concern. I don't know you, Josie said, gripping the pharmacy bag tighter. No, Roman agreed pleasantly, but you know Enzo Castellano, or at least where he is. The street seemed to tilt. I don't know what you're talking about, she said. Roman sighed, almost sympathetic. You work far too hard to be this brave. It's a bad habit poor people learn, because nobody ever gives them permission to be tired. Your nephew is Milo Danner, age 8, congenital heart disease, a specialist appointment at Mercy General tomorrow. There's a procedure available, but the hospital hasn't cleared the charity request. Children like Milo don't always have the luxury of waiting on paperwork. Josie couldn't breathe. If you go near him, Roman lifted one gloved hand gently. I'm offering help, real help, surgery paid in full, a better apartment, private care, no more begging billing departments for mercy. For one awful second, the offer opened in front of her like sunlight after years underground. Josie hated Roman for knowing exactly where to press. She hated herself more for listening. All I need, Roman said softly, is Enzo's location. If he's as dangerous as they say, why should your child suffer for him? Josie's eyes burned. Enzo isn't my concern. Exactly, Roman said, smile widening. You're a practical woman. Call me tonight. He held out a plain white card, printed with only a phone number, and when she didn't take it, tucked it into her bag himself, his glove brushing her hand. She went cold all over. Think of Milo, he said. Not Enzo, not loyalty, not some fantasy about being good. Then the sedan pulled away, leaving Josie with medicine in one hand and the devil's offer in the other. At the hospital the next morning, the doctor confirmed the cruelty of the timing. Milo needed the procedure soon, not someday. Josie nodded along, signed papers she barely understood, smiled for Milo when he asked if the doctor was going to fix the tired part of his heart. Then she found a bathroom stall, locked the door, and broke silently. When she got home, Enzo was sitting at her kitchen table with printouts, maps, and a black laptop that had never belonged to her. He read her face completely. "Roman came to me," she said. "He knows about Milo. He offered to pay for everything if I tell him where you are." The room got deeper, like the floor had dropped an inch. "And what did you tell him?" "Nothing yet." "Yet," he repeated. Her fear caught fire into anger. "Don't stand there, like I owe you an easy answer. You're not the one watching an 8-year-old get tired from walking to the bathroom, hearing a doctor say soon, with no money and no job behind you. So yes." I thought about taking his offer. Enzo's face didn't move, but something shifted behind his eyes. Josie pulled Roman's card from the bag and dropped it on the table between them. "But I won't do it. I won't hand a man over to the people who drugged him and hid him in a laundry cart. I won't teach Milo that love means turning cruel the second life gets frightening. I can't control what your world does, Enzo, but I can control who I become inside mine." Enzo looked at the card, then at her, and for the first time the most feared boss in the city looked genuinely shaken. Not by violence, but by the plain fact that she'd been handed the one thing she needed most and still refused to sell him for it. "In my world," he said quietly, "people sell each other for less than the price of a parking space." "I'm not in your world," Josie said. "No," he answered. "You're better than it. If she already has your heart, subscribe and stay for what's next." Josie turned away because the words hurt worse than any insult Roman had thrown. Kindness was dangerous when you couldn't afford to believe in it. That same night, Enzo arranged Milo's treatment. Josie fought him. She wouldn't sell her loyalty. He told her he wasn't buying it. He said debt had nothing to do with a child's heart. Milo had shown kindness to a man the world would have left to die on a cart, and Josie had done the same. That earned protection. No bargain, no chain, no price. The procedure was scheduled for the following week. Josie cried again that night, after Milo fell asleep, but not in a locked bathroom this time. She sat at her kitchen table with her face in her hands, and Enzo sat across from her without touching her, without trying to fix the moment with some grand promise. He simply stayed, for a woman who had carried everything alone so long that loneliness had started to feel like weather. The search for proof began in the hotel's own records. Josie hadn't only run the desk. Before life narrowed down to hospital bills and rent, she'd studied records management at community college, dreaming of running operations for a real company someday. She'd loved patterns. Clean columns, hidden links, the small truths numbers gave up when nobody thought to look. Roman's private foundation had hosted 3 galas at the Alderbrook in 2 years, and Josie remembered the odd details other people ignored, because poor women are trained by necessity to notice exactly what powerful men forget to hide. Enzo brought in old statements, hotel files, donor lists, shell company names. Josie sat beside him until late night blurred into early morning, Milo asleep down the hall, with a new medical monitor blinking soft green beside his bed. The pattern surfaced slowly, then all at once. Fake donations moved through Roman's foundation, split into smaller payments, some to officials, some to accounts tied to men who'd recently stopped answering Enzo's calls. Josie found a repeated hotel charge under one donor name that matched a room booked the same week Enzo's sister had died. Her hands went cold tracing the final transfer. Small compared to the rest, almost buried, but leading to a private security contractor, and from there to a safe house address, leaked on the exact day Sophia was taken. Enzo didn't speak when Josie showed him. He only stared at the screen while the apartment held its breath around him. "I'm sorry," she whispered. His hand rested open on the table. She covered it with her own, expecting him to pull away. Instead, his hand closed around hers, carefully at first, then with quiet desperation. "Roman didn't just betray you tonight," she said softly. "No," Enzo said. "He made me into the man he needed me to be." The next day, they returned to the hotel through the service entrance to copy one last set of records from the event's archive. Reckless, but Enzo needed the originals, not digital files Roman could dismiss as forged. They went in during shift change, maintenance uniforms, caps low, badges borrowed from someone Enzo trusted. Josie's hands shook as she unlocked the archive cabinet with a code she'd watched an assistant manager punch in 100 times. They found the donor files in a blue storage box, and Josie slid the originals into a folder beneath her jacket. That was when the lights flickered. Enzo turned toward the hallway. "Josie," he said quietly. "Move." The first gunshot cracked into the doorframe. Enzo pulled her down behind a metal desk, his body covering hers as glass rained down. Josie clutched the folder to her chest so hard the papers bent. Enzo returned fire twice, then hauled her toward the archive's back exit, down a stairwell, past roaring machinery and hissing steam pipes, her lungs burning, fear stretching the hotel out into something endless. The service tunnels beneath the Alderbrook were older than the building's polished face, built for exits nobody wanted listed on a floor plan. Josie remembered enough of them from a burst pipe night years back. Left at the boiler room, right past the old wine storage. Enzo stayed beside her, one hand at her back, not pulling, not pushing, just there. When a man stepped into their path, Enzo moved in front of her so fast she barely saw it happen. The fight was brief and brutal. Josie kept running when he told her to, even though every instinct screamed at her to look back. They burst out near the loading dock into rain that had started up again. Jax Calloway was waiting with the engine running, lean and gray-eyed, a scar across one cheek. Enzo got Josie into the back seat, then slid in beside her as Jax drove hard into the wet dark. "You were right about Roman," Jax said. Enzo looked down at the folder in Josie's lap. "No, she was." Jax glanced at her in the mirror. "Then I guess the city owes you something, Miss Danner." Josie held the folder tighter and watched the hotel shrink behind them. "The city doesn't owe me anything," she said. "I just want my nephew to live." The tribunal was scheduled for the same day as Milo's surgery. Josie hated the timing with a bitterness she could taste. Enzo offered to delay one or the other, but there was no delaying a failing child's heart, and Roman had already summoned the old families to a memorial dinner meant to crown himself the steady hand after Enzo's so-called disappearance. If Enzo skipped the tribunal, Roman would seize the empire by nightfall. If Enzo went, Josie would sit through the most important hours of her life alone. "I'll be fine," she told him, though her voice came out thin. Enzo looked through the glass at Milo, small in his bed, holding his old chipped toy train, even after Enzo had brought him a shining new silver one that morning. "I've got men on every entrance," he said. "Nobody reaches this floor without my say." Josie wanted to tell him she was terrified, that somewhere between the rain and the records and the way he actually listened when Milo talked, he'd stopped being just the dangerous man she'd saved. The words felt too large for a hospital corridor. Enzo seemed to understand anyway. He touched her cheek with the backs of his fingers, gentle enough to nearly undo her. "I'll come back," he said. "You have an empire to save," she answered. "I know exactly what I have to save," he said, and left. Milo went into surgery just after noon. Josie sat in the waiting room with her hands clasped so tight her fingers ached, minutes stretching into hours, every opening door jolting her heart into her throat. Outside, thunder rolled soft over the city, the windows reflecting her own tired face back at her uniform replaced by a borrowed sweater because her own clothes still smelled like dust and rain. She couldn't remember when she'd last slept. Then Roman arrived, stepping off the elevator alone, in a dark suit and a calm smile. The guards near the nurses' station reached beneath their jackets, but Roman lifted both hands lightly. "Relax," he said. "Hospitals make everyone so dramatic." Josie stood. "You should leave," she said. Roman smiled wider. "You should have taken my offer. He protects places," he said, glancing at the guards. "I study people." Josie's stomach twisted. "You can't have him." "I don't need him," Roman said. "I need Enzo to choose. His empire or you. He failed that test once with Sophia. I wonder if he'll fail it again." Before she could answer, an elevator opened behind him, and more men stepped out dressed like hospital staff, their shoes wrong, their eyes too alert. Enzo's guards moved instantly. Josie didn't run. She backed toward the surgical waiting room door, keeping her own body between Roman and the corridor that led to Milo. "Look at you," Roman said, laughing softly. "A night clerk playing queen." Josie lifted her chin. Better than a coward playing loyal friend. The smile dropped off his face. That was when Enzo appeared at the far end of the hall, coat soaked through, eyes fixed on Roman with a fury so controlled it barely looked human. Jax walked beside him. The hospital guards closed in behind Roman's fake staff, sealing a trap Enzo had already set. "You came back," Roman said. Enzo's eyes went to Josie first, and only once he knew she was unharmed did he turn to Roman. "I did." "Then you missed the tribunal," Roman said. "They're waiting for me now." "No," Enzo said. "They're waiting for the truth." Jack stepped forward, holding up a phone. The tribunal had been delayed. Every old boss in that room had already received copies of the Foundation records, the police payments, the transfer tied to Sophia's location. Enzo hadn't abandoned the tribunal. He'd simply moved it around Roman without letting him know. For the first time, Roman Voss looked afraid. What followed didn't belong to Josie. It belonged to men who had built entire lives on silence and power, who cared less about goodness than about betrayal. Enzo brought Roman to the memorial dinner not as an arrival, but as evidence. Jax told her later that Enzo spoke only once about Sophia, and every man at the table lowered his eyes. Roman Voss's power ended that night, destroyed not by bullets, but by the papers a hotel clerk had refused to hand over in a service tunnel. Enzo came straight back to the hospital before the doctor ever appeared. Josie was on her feet, her whole body hollowed out with waiting. When she saw him step into the room, alive, looking only at her, something inside her finally let go. She crossed the space between them, and he caught her carefully, arms closing around her like she was something precious and breakable. "Did you win?" she whispered. He held her tighter. "We did." The surgical doors opened. The doctor stepped out in blue scrubs, mask hanging loose. "Milo did wonderfully," she said, her smile tired but real. "The procedure was a success. There's recovery ahead, but his heart responded beautifully." Josie made a sound that wasn't quite a sob and wasn't quite a laugh, her knees buckling. Enzo caught her before she hit the floor, and this time she didn't pull away. She turned into his chest and cried with the full weight of every night she'd had to be strong because there hadn't been any other choice. The weeks after that were quiet in a way Josie didn't trust at first. Quiet had always meant the pause before the next bill, the next fever, the next cruel surprise. But this quiet held. Milo recovered slowly, then steadily, color returning to his face, his laugh growing stronger by the day, walking the hospital corridor, with Josie on one side and Enzo on the other, pretending the tile seams were train tracks. Milo only ever knew Enzo as the serious man who brought train books and never once looked bored. Josie and Milo moved out of the little apartment above Rui's Hardware, though she cried the day they left, because small and worn as it was, it had been entirely theirs. Enzo found them a bright house with real sunlight and a proper bedroom for Milo. She told him she would pay him back. He told her she could try for the next 100 years, if it made her feel better. She went back to school. Records management first, then foundation compliance, because now she understood exactly how much darkness a clean spreadsheet could hide. Enzo never once asked her to join his world. He gave her room to choose, protected without trapping her, heard the word no and honored it. And slowly, because trust isn't a door but a road, Josie began walking toward him anyway. Enzo changed too, though not in ways the city could easily see. To his enemies, he remained exactly what he'd always been: calm, dangerous, impossible to corner. But to Milo, he became the man who built wooden track loops across a living room floor. To Josie, he became the man who woke from nightmares and let her hold his hand after, who spoke about Sophia now without turning grief straight into ice. He looked at Josie's soft, generous body, not like something to overlook or forgive, but like part of a home he had never known how to want until she showed him. He never made her feel smaller for taking up space. He made room around her instead, and that turned out to be the most intimate thing anyone had ever done for her. Months later, once Milo was strong enough, Enzo arranged the train ride. Not a private jet, no grand display trying to buy its way past a simple dream. A real train, wide windows, blue seats, a route climbing slowly toward the mountains as morning light spilled gold across the hills. Milo pressed his face to the glass, laughing every time the tracks curved along the river below. Josie watched his reflection, healthy and bright-eyed, his hands wrapped around the silver train Enzo had given him. Enzo stood in the aisle a while before settling in beside her. Outside, the city fell away into fields, then hills, and far ahead, the mountains rose soft and blue beneath drifting clouds. Josie looked at Enzo and saw the man the whole city still whispered about. The danger was still there, and always would be. But she also saw the wounded stranger who'd woken up on her couch, the brother who had lost too much and built an empire out of the wreckage, the king who had reclaimed his kingdom and still chosen, every time, to come back to a hospital waiting room for her. Milo shouted from the window that the mountains looked like giants asleep under blankets. Josie laughed, and the sound surprised her with how light it felt. Enzo reached for her hand. He didn't take it like he owned it. He waited. Josie looked down at his open palm, then placed her hand in his. New story drops tomorrow, so subscribe now and don't miss it. For so long, the world had treated her kindness like weakness, her body a burden, her quiet survival, something ordinary and forgettable. Josie knew better now. Her kindness had carried a dying man through a storm. Her courage had stood firm against an offer that could have broken her clean in half. Her mind had found the truth buried under money and lies. Her love had kept Milo alive long enough to see the mountains for himself. Enzo leaned close, his voice low enough for only her to hear. "You gave me back my heart, Josie." She looked at Milo laughing in the sunlight, then at the dangerous man beside her, who had learned slowly, painfully, how to be gentle. "No," she whispered. "I think you still had it. You just forgot where you'd buried it." Enzo smiled then, not the cold smile the city feared, but something small and real and almost boyish. Josie rested her head against his shoulder as the train carried them higher, out of the smoke and noise of the city, and into the wide, bright quiet Milo had been dreaming about for as long as she could remember. Enzo had reclaimed his empire that week, but Josie had claimed something far greater, the right to be seen, to be loved, to be safe without ever having to make herself hard, and to believe, even after the darkest night of her life, that a story like hers could still open like a window straight toward the mountains.